For our next conversation, The Doer, Holding Corporate America Accountable and Civil Rights 3.0, please welcome Mellody Hobson, President and Co-CEO, Ariel Investments, number 94 on this year's Forbes Power Women's list, and interviewer Moira Forbes, Executive Vice President, Forbes.
We're all acutely aware of the inequities that exist in corporate America today, and I'm so excited that Mellody is here to talk about that. Mellody is one of the most powerful voices in the corporate world with her work at Ariel Investments and as a board member of companies like Starbucks and JP Morgan. But what I love about Mellody is that she's the ultimate self-made success story. She's broken the barriers and beaten the odds to reach the highest ranks in business with a trajectory that's been fueled by early challenges that have guided the way in which she uses her power to drive change. Mellody, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off by talking about the landscape in corporate America. You've been such a vocal proponent of the fact that corporate America needs to reflect the increasingly multicultural nation that we serve in order to thrive and survive. But obviously, we all know about the glaring inequities, especially given the year that we've had. You're calling this moment in time the Civil Rights Movement 3.0 or the Civil Rights Movement of corporate America. I'd be curious, what gives you the confidence that this call to action is actually going to be met with something substantive and with real change?
I'm not sure I can say I have confidence in that yet, that outcome, but I'm very, very hopeful. And I'm naturally an optimist. Confidence and optimism, I think, are two different things. I think where I feel that we have a greater chance for success than perhaps ever before is because I think the world is holding corporate America accountable. And that accountability is showing up in a lot of ways. It's the people that work inside of those corporations. I mean, just think about it. A few months ago, you had employees walking out of big tech companies when they objected to policies and issues. The customer is holding the customer accountable, the company accountable. I mean, we saw that very recently with even something like the Washington Redskins, where their sponsor was the big driver in their name changing, reportedly. And then last but not least, I think everyday citizens are holding companies accountable. And because of the viral nature of our society, that accountability can be very, very intense. So that's why I'm optimistic. I think that accountability is now front and center. These problems are at the feet of corporate America, societal problems like issues around race, diversity, and inclusion, like mental health issues. I mean, just think about it. 10 years ago, we didn't have live shooter drills inside of companies. So the world has really changed in a meaningful way. And I hope that is what will lead to better outcomes.
When we look at a year like this, everyone is obviously very eager to have actionable next steps and solutions. You've talked so much about the business community having given a lot of lip service, but not necessarily the elbow grease to see the change that we're all so eager to move forward with. You actually, though, have talked about a formula around what companies should be doing. Can you walk us through that? And I love that you always say that math has no opinion. Talk a little bit about what needs to happen to take that accountability to the next level.
So I always say, if it matters, it counts. So start counting. And to your point, math has no opinion. The math will tell you where you are. Our firm is a sponsor of something called the Black Corporate Directors Conference. It's been around for a couple of decades, where we bring together Fortune 500 Black directors. And in recent years, we've also added Latinx directors as well as a version of our own form of inclusion. And at the Black Corporate Directors Conference, we have a call to action around the civil rights agenda, saying for us to be true fiduciaries, we need to make sure the civil rights agenda is also considered in the boardroom because it's in the best interest of the company. And to that end, we talk about the 3 Ps: people, purchasing, and philanthropy. And we say, count across ethnicity, not one multicultural umbrella that has gender and race all rolled up together, because that masks the underrepresentation. but you count across ethnicity at the board level, at the C-suite level, as you go all the way down the organization. And you can't pat yourself on the back if 90% of your diversity comes from assistants who happen to be Black women. That doesn't work. And so we start with that. Then we did the next P is purchasing. We think this whole idea of procurement and supplier diversity is last century. So we talk about business diversity, making sure that in the biggest areas of corporate spend, which these days are professional services, financial services, technology, that you have diverse vendors and suppliers working for the company, because that leads to economic opportunity for not just entrepreneurs, but whole communities. And then last but not least, philanthropy. Now, philanthropy lately has been the big area. People have been, bragging about some of their philanthropic donations. And when it comes to civil rights institutions, I think that's great. But I also don't want it to be the tail that wags the dog. Because at the end of the day, you can only fix your house from within, not from without.
You've talked so much about, obviously, these systemic barriers, and these are things that have been entrenched in our country for hundreds of years. But there's also these opportunities that you talked about to be able to really make some tactical changes right now. Obviously, these larger issues need to be addressed, but that will have some lag time in terms of focus before we see results. If we start dealing with the inequalities in corporate America today, how long do you think it will take to see the needle move? We often feel like change, at least pre this year, has been a pace that's been glacial. Are you optimistic that if there is this accountability and this counting, that we can move the needle forward in a way that captures the momentum that we're seeing at least in 2020?
So if you want to affect real change, you hit people in their wallets, their pocketbooks. And so all of this is great, but you have to make sure you have incented the right behavior. And as we say in corporate America, you get what you incent. So where there is accountability and where there are incentives directly related to moving the needle on these outcomes, we will have faster change.
I want to talk a little bit about taking a step back, just 2020 in general being a year that has exemplified disruption in some ways, disruption that's been really important in terms of moving us forward, and obviously disruption in terms of what it's done to the businesses, to the economies, the social fabric of this country and around the world. Even before this year, we've talked about the fact that everything is being disrupted. We feel like in every industry, regardless of an industry, we're seeing this rapid change. You are someone who is no stranger to navigating these times of massive disruptions through your own company, the boards that you sit at, but also the corridors of power that you're a part of. After a year where everyone is grappling with this uncertainty and really having to recalibrate in terms of a new normal or a better normal, what's been your best advice around, or what would be your advice to people listening around navigating this time of change, given your own experience, but also what you've learned in terms of the other leaders that you've collaborated with?
My favorite line is from Warren Buffett, and he says, champions adapt. And I've always remembered that. And when I think about the best leaders, they are confronted with challenges. They are inevitable. There is no business that just goes smooth sailing day in and day out. There isn't one. There's no life that's like that. And so the question is, what do you have in your bank when it comes to resilience and fortitude? And most importantly, when met with obstacles and the need for change, your ability to pivot and change. And so based upon my belief that Buffett is right, that champions adapt, you find yourself adapting very, very quickly. And this pandemic has been a perfect example of it. I'm on the board of JP Morgan, and Jamie Dimon said once publicly, we all took the business continuity test and passed. And I thought it was a brilliant concept, because look at all the things that have accelerated. Who would have thought that we could run all of these businesses and institutions this disconnected, but in some ways so connected by technology, and actually have it work? And it's worked actually in ways I think that have exceeded many expectations. So we've all adapted to that work from home environment. We've all adapted to juggling all the balls that we have to juggle at home for a lot of people. We've adapted to having to solve for distance and problems in ways that we had not ever thought we'd have to do before, no travel, etc. Can this period be a time that makes us smarter and better at what we do? And that's what I keep saying at my company at Ariel. I want to slingshot out of this time, not be in it that you're just sort of stumbling out, but how can we use all this time in our favor to really make us a better institution? And the organizations that are doing it, we're seeing so much kind of digital adoption and other kind of technological adoptions at this time. I think they're going to be better institutions when this is all said and done, despite the enormous challenges, terrible pain, and real sacrifice that people have had to make.
I think I totally agree. In times of crisis, there can be opportunities. And I love that analogy you use of slingshotting out of this moment. This year's also, though, been a moment where there's been a lot of questions about the future of this country, the future of business, and much has been said about the American dream and potentially whether it's fraying. You said that your own life story speaks to this concept or exemplifies the American dream. What do you say to those who question the future of the American dream and whether it's alive? And how do you think about it in the context? If you talk a little bit about your personal experience as well, in terms of how you think about the future.
First and foremost, I would say that, again, my optimism always gives me a ton of hope, but I also recognize hope is not a plan. I believe very much in a capitalist system that we have in this country. It is the best system that there is, but it is imperfect and it needs to work for more people. That is a fact. Everyone does not have the same opportunity in this country. And oftentimes the differences in that opportunity is based upon race and gender. It is a fact. So the question that we have as a society is how we can continue to overcome some of these, I'll call them barriers to entry, that hold the whole country back from its greatness. No, I think we were better than we were 100 years ago. We're better than we were 50 years ago. We'll be better 50 years from now than we are today, but we are not where we need to be. And so that we need to acknowledge and stay very clear-eyed and cognizant about, and not pretend that nothing's wrong. America was born with a birth defect, as my friend Brian Stevenson from the Equal Just Initiative says. And the thing about a birth defect, which for us was slavery, a birth defect is not fatal, but it can be something that it's always there. You never get rid of. You always notice, and by pretending it's not there doesn't make it go away. So we need to deal with the issues that lead to the inequality in this country head on. But we also need to recognize that a tremendous amount of progress has been made. When I think of my own life, on my worst day, my very worst day that I have, I always remind myself, I'm not in a field picking cotton. And it gives me the perspective to understand what came before me, what sacrifices were made for me, and the responsibility I have to others who are behind me and in front of me.
So much of what we're talking about throughout the conference is the fact that everyone has their own power capital, their own voice to deploy as agents of change, regardless of what position you are in this country. You've spent so much of your career working in an industry that's male dominated, where you were the only or one of the few women, you were the only or a handful of few Black leaders in the room. Talk a little bit about, though, how you found ways to harness that difference to be able to be a more effective change agent, and how people can think differently about how they can better utilize their own influence and their own voice to be able to have impact around the issues that they feel really passionately about.
There's so much there, so I'm going to try to break it down as simply as I can and not be too long-winded with my answer. But the first part is everyone has power. Everyone has power. And I say that to people, and people will look at me and they'll shake their head and I'm just this, I'm a lowly this. And I'm like, no. Rosa Parks decided not to stand up. Let's just start with that. And she changed an outcome in a major, major way for our society. She broke down barriers by just refusing to stand up on that bus. So that's first and foremost, understanding you have power and owning it, whatever corner of society you're in, is what ultimately leads to meaningful and massive change in our society when everyone feels that accountability and their power. and that power. So that's number one. Secondly, for me, yes, I've often been in situations where I was first or only. And there were a couple of ways that I thought about it. In the beginning, I was starting my career and I'd be in conferences and people would come up to me and they'd know my name. And I was always shocked by it until I started to realize it's because I'm the only one. So then I said, well, I'm just going to use this to my advantage. I'm going to use this to stand out. If Mellody is going to be something that really does stand out and I'm the only one, I'm going to be like Cher or Beyonce, where I don't even need a last name because you're going to know that I'm there. And if I'm there, I'm going to have original ideas and I'm going to have a point of view and I'm going to be willing to take risks. So you can use the lack of others as a way to really advocate for others by owning your difference. And I owned my Blackness and owned my gender. And I'm really good with myself in that regard. Now, at the same time, I have a friend who said something very profound on television the other day. The Formula One race car driver, Lewis Hamilton, 7-time champion. He was talking to Gayle King and he said, being the first Black anything is a proud and lonely walk. And I got chills. I mean, I literally, my eyes instantly welled up. Proud and lonely walk. And then it was such a profound idea because I knew exactly what he meant. Lonely. And so when you're lonely, what do you want? Company. And our job when we're the first one in that proud moment is to make room for other people and make sure we have company, bring other people in.
I love that. I love that. That's sort of that concept of that responsibility, but recognizing that it comes with that opportunity comes with huge challenges as well. You started off that answer by talking about the fact that everybody has power, whether they realize it or not. I would be so curious, how do you define power?
That's a really great question. For me, power is around voice and speaking my truth. And I always tell people truth comes with a small t, not a capital T, around some of these issues. You have your point of view. Now, I'm not debating a mathematical outcome, which is an answer and a truth with a capital T or equals MC squared or things like that. But I'm saying around some of these issues that are personal or where there's a perspective where there are nuances or differences of opinion, truth comes with a small t. And power to me is owning and speaking your truth and not giving it up or being in a situation where you're afraid to give that point of view. Now, I know that's asking a lot of people, but I think it's the only way that we move forward. I know some might say easier said than done. I totally get it. Totally. Trust me. But courage is not the absence of fear. It's just overcoming it.
Well, Mellody, thank you so much for those insights. We're so grateful that you not only have an incredible voice, but that you've taken such powerful actions to move so many issues forward in a way that benefits us all, and more importantly, benefits so many future generations to come. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.